Dr. Michelle Johnston, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Howie. I was really looking forward to being here and having this conversation with you.
Yeah, so, it's always good to talk to you, but it's even better to have an excuse like your best-selling book. This is a semi-professional audience. Like there's a lot of people here who are doing good work in the world, in organizations and on teams, but a lot of us are just looking to be better leaders in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, in whatever ways we are. And your book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership, is really a manual for I think of it like a detox for those of us who grew up thinking of leadership as one way of being or something that was really just for a special group of people. And so that's kind of where I want to get into in our conversation.
I love how you just framed it. Nobody ever framed it as a detox. I love that. And it is so true. That's what this seismic shift is about, right? Is truly understanding that the old ways of what so many of us thought leadership looked like, sounded like, felt like, and how to be successful, those ways are just no longer effective. And it's much more about true, meaningful connection, because at the end of the day, Howie, you and I both know that what really drives results is connection. Connection drives results.
Yep. So before we get into the content, I would love for you to tell folks a little bit about yourself. Let's practice what we preach and give you a chance to connect with the audience. Who are you? Where'd you come from? And what do you care about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Michelle Johnston, and I was born in Alexandria, Virginia, to a family, my mom and dad, an older brother, and my dad got a really great job early. I mean, I think he was maybe 22 years old with General Motors, and he grabbed on tightly, and they saw great potential in him. And so back in the day, and this was in the 70s and the 80s, when you were really good at your job, big companies like that, and when they promoted you, they transferred you. So I was a corporate brat and moved around every 2 years from Alexandria, Virginia to Baltimore, Maryland, East Brunswick, New Jersey, Detroit, Michigan, Nashville, Tennessee, Tampa, Florida, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and they just kept on moving. And so I grew up in every 2 years, going to new schools and meeting new friends and really enjoying getting to know different cultures. And so that's what kind of sparked my interest in leadership and communication and culture early on, just listening to my dad every night over dinner, talking about how he led his teams, how he motivated his teams, and also just being fascinated by people's stories. So my grandfather was a PhD at Georgetown, and for some reason took a liking to me as his grandkid who decided that I should be the one to get a PhD. And I kind of went kicking and screaming, Howie. At the time, I had just finished my master's from Auburn, and he was on a letter writing campaign. My granddad was, and said, you need to get a PhD. Michelle, you need to get a PhD. So I ended up, and again, I'm really glad he pushed me. I can't imagine I would have done it. And I received my PhD in communication from LSU. And then that's when I really started this journey as a management professor, leadership coach, and ultimately an author on leadership.
Wow. So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm just curious in this moment, when your dad shared his leadership stories, was he a seismic shift kind of guy or more of an old school or something in the middle? Like, what were the lessons you learned from him about leadership at that point?
That's a great question, Howie. And I don't think I really understood how influential my father's leadership was on my life until I was standing at my book launch party. And here I just written an entire book on the seismic shift and how that old command and control authoritarian was no longer effective. And I'm staring at the audience and completely not rehearsed. I realized that I needed to dedicate the book to my father, because my father is the opposite of the command and control. He always led people first. He led with beautiful motivation and enthusiasm and commitment and compassion. He was just a fantastic leader, and he was really ahead of his time. And working for General Motors, which was very hierarchical, very old school command and control, and somehow he did it differently. And I continue to be impressed. He and I are still very close to this day.
Wow. So that raises the question, like, is it really a shift in leadership? Like, has leadership always been what you describe? And there was this sort of, I don't know, couple millennium blip in terms of like command and control power. And there have always been people like your dad, or maybe he would have become, the CEO if he had been different. Like, how do you see the history of these two different conflicting, in some ways, styles of leadership?
Yeah, I think for about 100 years, it was the hierarchical command and control was definitely the norm. And I think my father was a true anomaly. And now what I'm seeing as an executive coach is people with my father's personalities are the ones that are truly getting to the top, where my father was put in sales and marketing because he cared so much about people and was such a positive person that they didn't know what to do with him, but put him in sales and marketing where he was really good. Whereas everybody else, we ended up in executive office. And let me tell you, the others in executive office, were much more of just rigid and micromanagers and controlling. So the seismic shift, and I think the millennials did prompt this. I remember in about the year 2003, I started an executive mentor program at Loyola, and I went and recruited and enlisted this great force, this team of very successful business professionals here in New Orleans to mentor our business students. And that was when I first started hearing from these high level leaders, and they would give our students internships, and they would call me and say, Michelle, what is wrong with this new generation? They want to leave for yoga. They want something called balance in their lives. It's work because it's work, and play is play. And what in the world? This is crazy. And I remember at that time, I was subscribing to the command and control. I didn't think that I could be successful leading like my father, which is really interesting because I looked around the College of Business and in academia. Academia is very much old school command and control, at least at that time. Professors came in, they had gone to get their PhDs to be true experts in their field, and they marched into the classroom and lectured on hours with a piece of chalk. And there was very little two-way connection. It was very one-way. And you were the expert. And so I think with technology, you asked about kind of the history. I think with the advances in technology, all of a sudden we have younger individuals who could have access to information. We, the older generation, didn't have all the answers. So you had to adapt to that. And then I think the millennials saw their parents as committing their entire lives to these companies that really did not do them well. I mean, my father ended up retiring from General Motors with a parachute package and did really, really well. But these millennials saw a lot of their parents going to lose their jobs, and they thought, I don't want to work like that. Even to this day, Howie, I taught in Rome this summer, and we were talking about my students at Loyola. We were talking about the effects of a negative boss, a jerk boss, and how those effects bleed into the family. And I asked my students to raise their hands, how many of them grew up and a negative boss affected their family, and 90% of their hands raised. So, I mean, we still have jerk bosses, but I do think the historical context of this situation is the millennials pushed the envelope and said, I don't want to live like my parents did. I want more. And then you advance that, and then you have the pandemic, and now we're all coming out of it saying, why can't we have positive workspaces? Why can't we be happy and have friends at work? A la Morag Barrett, who just had her book launch today. You, me, and we, how to be an ally at work. We want better work environments. And that's where we are now. And that's the seismic shift. You can be a leader who cares about your people and gets the results that you need. Mm-hmm.
So you tell a lot of stories in the book, mostly from, New Orleans, leaders, and you also tell on yourself, right? That there you mentioned like you came into academia as command and control, even with the model of your father as a counterexample. Is it because you're a woman and you felt like a woman has to act like if you act like in a caring, compassionate way, you're just going to get ignored or stepped on?
I think I was 28 years old. I was young. I was female. And it was the industry that I was in. So then I was in academia, and I looked around, and the rock star professors in academia were mostly older men who really employed this command and control style. And so they were my mentors, and we would go out to lunch, and they would say, Michelle, you got to march into the classroom and slam the door and lock it. And if anybody's late, they can't get in and they miss out. Michelle, when they turn in papers and there's misspelling, fail them. So they were pretty severe, and yet they received Faculty Member of the Year awards, and students loved them. And so I looked around, and because of my upbringing, I was really good at fitting in. I learned how to assess a situation and fit in. So I had come from a consulting firm my entire 20s. I had worked for a consulting firm in New Orleans, which is why I'm in New Orleans. They recruited me in my master's program, and I loved it. It was communication consulting. Kitty Watson worked at Tulane as a professor in communication. Larry Barker, who's now deceased, he was a professor at Auburn, and they were amazing. And I felt completely allowed to be myself in the consulting context. But when I pivoted to academia, I didn't see that as a way to be successful. So I hid pieces and parts of myself and pretended that I wasn't as positive and enthusiastic and as feminine as I naturally am in order to try to be successful. And guess what? We all know the end of that story. It didn't work. I mean, I literally could have, I almost failed as a professor because I just was trying to be somebody who was so not me.
Do you think that had that been your natural style, you could have made it work?
Absolutely. I think I would have been amazing. But you know, that's what I discovered in all my research, Howie. People pick up on it when you're being fake. So I would march into the classroom, and in my head, I was doing what all of my mentors told me to do. And yet I knew in my heart, that's not who I was. And so then my students, you know, New Orleans is not a huge metropolis. I would see them out and about or in the park or at the grocery store, and I was me. And there was this disconnect. Like, why in the world is this person showing up in the classroom totally mean? Right. And so they don't like that. I wasn't connected with myself because I didn't think I could be successful being myself. But when I finally gave myself permission, come in, march into the classroom and do what you know from the consulting world, do what you know works, which is experiential education, role play, interaction, inclusivity, all the things that I knew that I had pushed aside trying to fit into the old school model. So I think that's why I know for a fact, Howie, that's why I ended up writing the book, not just because I was seeing in my coaching practice leaders getting forced out of organizations who were also command and control. I realized that had been me, and I had been so close to failing that I was on a mission, and I want to help people connect better with themselves so that they can connect with their teams, so that they can be successful in their companies.
So something that feels a little bit wiggly to me is when you talk about like not being fake and your experience growing up of having to fit in. Like on one sense, you being a chameleon is very authentic. On the other hand, it can turn out fake. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I would hear that growing up, and I didn't understand what these girls would talk about, especially during the middle school years when that's really tough with girls. And they would say, oh, you're fake. You're fake. And I remember thinking, no, I'm being totally me. But yet you're right. I had gotten so good at adapting that I was being authentically a chameleon. I was authentically a chameleon, right? And so I didn't really understand. And it wasn't until I read Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and I literally cried when I read that book because I realized she said the opposite of belonging is trying to fit in. And you can never truly feel like you belong when all you're doing is trying to fit in. And boy, that got my attention because it had caught up with me, Howie. Think about that. I had succeeded growing up as a kid, but all of a sudden I'm in my profession and it's not working because it caught up with me. I'm trying to be somebody I'm not. I'm coming across as fake, right? And then I had to really, really spend time with myself and reflect, what was I hiding? Why hadn't I owned my story? Who was I? And I realized I'd been so self-conscious that I didn't feel like I had a home. People would say, oh, where are you from? Because everybody wants to know, where are you from? So they can put you in a category. Are you a Northeast girl, a Northern, Midwest? Are you from Florida? Are you Southern? And I didn't know where I was from because I wasn't from anywhere. And I struggled with that answer. So because I struggled with that, I ended up hiding that part of myself. Because I had hid that part of myself, people weren't feeling connected to me because I wasn't showing up. I didn't know what in the heck my story was. So I had to work really hard on that. And now when people ask me, I rehearsed it enough. I say, yeah, I grew up a corporate brat moving all over the country. And there are good sides to that and bad sides to that. I really loved learning about different cultures. And then on the other side of the coin, it took me a little bit while, to figure out who I was. And now I come clean with that, and I'm very upfront with that. Whereas before I just hid it.
Yeah, and I think, you have a very extreme example of sort of putting on masks to fit in, but all of us do it, right? Like fitting, I don't know anyone who grew up feeling like they totally belonged kind of anyway, like maybe in their immediate family, maybe in a church community, but even so, like even the best parents are like, don't do that, change this. Like we grow up very sensitive to who do the people important to me need me to be? And we can bring that into adulthood. And I think leadership, is a great opportunity to kind of undo a lot of the psychic knots we've tied ourselves in, to say, like, the first section of your book is own your story, meaning not, when I first read that sentence, I thought it was like, your narrative, your brand, like sort of craft something. But you're saying the exact opposite, like warts and all, take it all, own it all, and you'll be surprised at how people respond well to that when they sense your self-acceptance and vulnerability.
Bingo. Absolutely. So yeah, I remember I was a big fan of Tom Peters, and he wrote a book, The Brand Called You. And I loved that. And when I ran the executive mentor program, I mentored all of my students. You've got to have a brand, and you got to, be this professional corporate person. And then I realized that, and this also goes back to the Gallup polls and the Strengths Finder, that if we focus more on people's strengths and make sure we put them in a place where they can excel and shine, that you do a whole lot more good than if you just focus on what they're not doing and continue to try to badger them in how to fix that thing that's not where they're not fitting in. So I also followed Ben Zander, had a book, The Art of Possibility, and I'll never forget his story. He was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he struggled connecting with his musicians because he was so command and control, and he would really, he would point out to everybody if you made a mistake, and created this culture of fear. And he realized, wait a second, this is not working. Why don't I look at he was also a teacher. Why don't I look at my orchestra of musicians or my class of musicians as A students, no matter what, and see it as my job that if they fall a little bit below A, it's my job to get them to an A because they are all gifted musicians, rather than looking for the bad and the mistakes. And that shift, that seismic shift, changed the way that I taught, because that was much more my personality. I wanted to walk into the classroom and walk into my coaching practice and be able to say, I see you, I see your gifts. Now let's bring your gifts out and make sure you can use them, and make sure you're in the best position that will capitalize on them. And I think that, again, that's really important for somebody to understand. When you're owning your brand, you got to know what your story and journey is, and you got to know what your superpowers are, what differentiates you, what makes you better than the rest. That's your brand, and make sure that you're in a position to sell that rather than trying to be somebody you're not.
So I perfectly honest, like I something inside me is uncomfortable with the idea of thinking like, how am I better than others?
Different.
Right.
How do you differentiate yourself from others? Right.
Yeah. So that feels much better because
how do you differentiate?
For me personally, like I've discovered pretty recently. So I had a professor on the podcast, a clinical psychologist, Ronald Siegel, who wrote this beautiful book called The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary. And I realized through reading that book and in conversation with him that there was this constant energy in me of constantly comparing myself to other people and having to be, who am I better than? Who's better than me? How can I get better than them? Like everywhere I went, there was this filter, and I'm self-aware enough not to like make it really obvious, but still there was this even in like our networking group, I'd be like, well, who's on top here, and who's in the middle, and who's on the bottom, and where am I, and how can I move up, and right, and so to think of it in terms of preferences and differences, right? Like we're all A players. Like feels very beautiful.
There's room for all of us to succeed. That's right, because we all bring different gifts to the argument, to the team, to the table. And there really is room for all of us to succeed. I remember one of the leaders that I saw get pushed out of an organization. He was a perfectionist and demanded perfection from himself, and then demanded perfection in his team. And ultimately it created this competition between the team members, thinking that there was only one spot at the top to be his favorite or to win the next promotion. And that culture of fear, I mean, it caused anxiety. It was stifling. It was the opposite of innovation, right? What we're all trying to be. So I realized that there's room for all of us to succeed. And that's where diversity pays off. And diversity only pays off, right, if you're really bringing your differentiating gifts to the table. If you're trying to be like everybody else, then you're not going to have these diverse ideas if you're just a robot of others, right?
Right. So that's why, I've been reading more and more about diversity isn't enough. You also need inclusivity. So the diverse people who are in the room are actually part of the culture and the communication and the decision making.
Correct. And so, this takes a lot of work. And for those listeners, thank you for tuning in. And if, some of the strategies that I recommend is really sit down with a pen or paper, or maybe you don't have to write it out. Maybe tell it to somebody. Just what is your story? What is the journey? What journey have you been on that makes you different? What has been your significant life event? What has been a real challenge in your life? And how did you overcome that? How did you grow? Because that journey makes you who you are, and it allows others to connect with you. And then you can use those gifts to help others. I mean, that's what's beautiful. If you suppress kind of the challenges in your life and you try to appear perfect, then your perfection equals disconnection. That's what I've learned too. If you're trying to portray that you're perfect, people don't really connect with you because you're just not real. Perfection equals disconnection.
Yeah. And I really, love that point, that perspective of taking your story and even like looking at the parts that you would elide, you would naturally skip over, and really bringing those out. Like I was in marketing for 10 years, and marketers know this, that if I'm going to try to sell you on like, you're going to take my course or buy my book or something, that you're only going to, if I'm perfect, you have no interest in it. But when I tell you my story about how I grew up with this problem and that problem, we lie, marketers lie to make it worse. Like, I had 7 kids and we were living in my sister-in-law's basement eating Ritz crackers and store brand peanut butter for 5 years until I discovered this, right? Like we do that because it really works, but to be able to do it authentically with your own story and say, I own all of this. I own my disadvantages. I own my mistakes. I own my inadvertent cruelties, and here I am trying to do better. Like, that's so attractive.
And that's why TED Talks have become so successful, is there's a method, a format to it. And it begins with struggle. And each person gets on stage and begins with their story of struggle. And then ultimately how they rose up and overcame it and became successful and discovered something new and now is helping others. I mean, it's a format that we all can use. And I try to tell my leaders too, to do this exercise with their teammates, because not only, and this is what I've seen, I do it with my MBA students, and when they own their journeys and get up and publicly say, here's who I am. I'm Michelle Johnston, born in Alexandria, Virginia. I grew up a corporate brat, and I learned that as hard as it was moving around, I really enjoyed getting to know others, but then I lost myself. And so by going through that experience, it taught me compassion for others and other stories. And I became stronger as a result. And hearing students get up and say, this is me, this is my life and what I've gone through, and here's how I overcame whatever challenge it was, then it allows the person who's owning his or her story to hold their head higher and feel more comfortable in their own skin and more confident. And then you can see the people in the room feel more connected with that person. There's very little room for judgment when you actually know somebody's story. And It's so much easier to judge when you're like, oh, that's Tom over there. Oh, he looks really cocky, very arrogant. Tom, look at Tom. Tom's from Venezuela. I wonder what making up all these stories in your head about Tom from Venezuela. When he gets up and Tom from Venezuela then said, I grew up so poor that I had to share a bedroom with my grandmother. And I can't believe, true story. And he said, and I can't believe I'm sharing this with you. But the only reason I'm sharing this with you, because I was so embarrassed for so long, is because my grandmother just died. And now I realize I wouldn't trade that time for anything. And that was a real story that a student from Central America, South America shared in front of everybody. And you could see him relax and you could see the audience go, I like this guy. I trust him. He's not just Tom from Venezuela in the corner who you're making up he's a real person.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, and you feel free to duck the question if it's, apolitical or impolitic for you. But, when you talk about these kind of cultures where we as leaders can create scenarios and cultures, and you talk about that in the end of the book about creating a culture where people can be vulnerable. At the same time, in the wider world, I'm seeing a huge tilt back towards command and control, authoritarianism, dictatorship.
Really?
People following politicians who are sort of anti-democratic, and who their public persona is they would never admit ever having made a mistake or ever having gotten anything other than an A+. And we're seeing this in our country. We're seeing this around the world. And I'm wondering what you think is, what are the factors that determine which style gets to be ascended? Because, God, I would love to live in a world where everyone stands up and says, here's who I am, flawed humanity and all, we all belong. And I'm seeing so much of the other. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. In my leadership class, we would not talk politics because it just got so divisive. And instead, we would continue to look at leaders who led from a kinder, more compassionate way, and looked at the results that they got versus leaders who, you look at Jack Welch, who's no longer with us. He did a great job with General Electric for years, and people idolized and looked up to him. But now people are looking back going, oh my gosh, that was kind of an abusive culture. Right. And so we don't want to repeat those mistakes at all. And I do believe that what we're seeing, what the research is showing us coming out of the pandemic most recently is, just talking about quiet quitting. There are people who are saying, I'm going to sit here and not do a whole lot unless I have a leader who I know really believes in me and I believe in what I'm doing and creates an environment that motivates me. If not, peace out. I'll get paid, but I'm just kind of phoning it in. And so the research is showing us, Howie, that at least here in America, where we are, people are craving leaders who see them. And there's a Zulu word that I just learned about that means we see you. And it's their greeting. And I think it's Siyabonga, is it?
Siyabonga.
And I could be saying,
it's
yes.
Siyabonga.
And it truly means not I see you, but we see you, and we see you as a whole person. And that's exactly, I believe, where we are right now in what I have seen. And I was a little scared. You had mentioned I started my research with just the New Orleans leaders that I knew. And then after the interview, I'd say, do you have a recommendation of who I should interview next? And then I was able to go global and broaden my interview base. But in the beginning, I was scared. Like, do you think because I'm in New Orleans, this is just a New Orleans thing that I'm seeing, that connection is what's driving results now? And then I thought, well, is this a Southern thing? And then Howie, I started getting on the 100 Coaches call, which for your listeners, Howie and I are both a part of 100 Coaches, a Marshall Goldsmith group. And these are some of the very best coaches in the world. And on these Monday calls, I started, hearing from people from France and England and Russia, all over the place, that this was an issue. And people were now talking about the importance of true, meaningful connection. And that's when I realized, okay, this is not just a New Orleans or a Southern thing. This is a global phenomenon. And again, the research keeps supporting that.
Yeah. And it's, when we look at our cultures and what sort of it has become, like the hunger for connection or for belonging, as Brene Brown would put it, is so strong that I think maybe that's where some of the command and control appeal is, that like, I don't know how to belong. I don't feel safe in this environment being myself. I'm not willing to go first and put my vulnerabilities out there because I think I'm going to get eaten like a bunch of, piranhas preying on me. But the need for belonging is so great that I'm going to just basically join this cult of leaders, this cult of the leader. And at least I'll have a toxic imitation of true community, true connection with other humans.
You might be right. I haven't really put a whole lot of thought into, because my research isn't into the politics of it. You might be right. It might be easier for some personalities to say, ooh, I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable, but I know as a human, or I might not be that aware of it, but something has a need inside of me to belong. So I'm just going to join a group of like-minded people, and this leader figure is going to tell me what to do, and that feels easier. It is, to be your own individual and show up every day, this is me, takes courage for sure. And again, I just came off of Morag Barrett's book launch, and it's about having a friend at work and why that is necessary. And that 20% of people feel like they don't have a friend and they're incredibly lonely. 20%. And people are just feeling lonely, and our social skills, are not as sharpened coming out of the pandemic. Right. And so all of us are just feeling a little bit self-conscious and a little bit lonely and a little bit empty and a little bit tired. And so that's where leadership is so important now, because there is pressure. It's hard to be a leader right now with what the world is throwing at us. And yet it also can be one of the most rewarding roles you will ever play, is how to support your people, develop your people, bring your people together and accomplish things together. That interdependence, not independence, but that interdependence is where the magic lies. And Hubert Joly, who's also in our group, talks about that in The Heart of Business. It's that interdependence is where magic is. It's where the people coming together, you can do great things together, but you do have to trust one another. You have to be vulnerable. You have to take risks. And we've been apart from one another for so long now through the pandemic in a virtual environment that I think people are feeling kind of trepidation about, especially if they're going back to the office face to face, like, whoa, this is a lot of stimulation. Can I really trust this? We're all feeling a lot of different emotions, Yeah.
And, one thing that comes to me is, like, when you talked about the courage, in some sense, leaders, the higher you go, the less risk there is, because people are going to, they're a little scared of you, or they attribute status or wisdom to you that maybe you don't deserve, but you can take some risks as a leader. On the other hand, the higher you get, the more you have to lose. So it's kind of like takes a different kind of courage to say, okay, I'm going to go first, which is, I guess, the literal definition of a leader is the one who goes first.
You are absolutely right. I'm coaching a leader right now who's a brand new CEO. And man, it just, it takes a lot of emotional energy every single day to go through that transition of this new CEO, to gain the trust. He's on a listening tour right now, and the courage to just be himself as a leader rather than his predecessor, who was very different. I mean, it's exhausting, but yet again, so darn rewarding.
And the other thing that's coming to me is when you talked about going into academia and having only role models of like gruff, demanding, angry male professors, that the new style of leadership actually calls for people of other stripes. It's like, I sometimes think about like the people that I want to be the politicians and the law enforcement officers in my community are the ones who don't want the job, right? It's the ones who want the job that I'm scared of, right? Who want the power. And so similarly, like if leadership is command and control, then those types of people are going to become the leaders. And we've seen what's happened to our culture and our civilization and our planet with that kind of imbalance. So it's like, for you to be as equally as strong or even more strong as a leader in a completely different model, I think opens it up for a very more divergent leadership set.
Absolutely. We just had a phenomenal leader at Loyola, Tanya Tetlow, who I profiled in my book. She became the first layperson at Loyola as president and the first female. And talk about a seismic shift. I mean, she had such a different leadership style than the Jesuits who led this institution for 100 years. And she was so effective, and she absolutely owned her journey and owned her story. And she showed up in a compassionate way, and she was beloved. And I'm on the presidential search committee now to replace her. And our entire first meeting, we talked about what a loss it is. She ended up taking the presidency at Fordham University. And they're really lucky to have her because she was just a phenomenal leader. And that was a seismic shift that we all welcomed. I mean, I would see her. It's really hard to come into a faculty meeting and win faculty members over because they can be quite critical. And she was able to do it. And she did it in her own beautifully compassionate way. So yeah, there's a way to do it. And also the mentors who I referred to, they weren't, I mean, yeah, some of them were gruff, but they were charismatic, and I wanted to be like them. So I don't want you to think there were these angry men who walked in the classroom and yelled at everybody. They just had they were like military drill sergeants, they had very strict ideas in their head that you had to, what is it called? Like, in order to build everybody up, you had to knock everybody down first. And it was just this old model in their head, but yet the students adored them, loved them, and they were super charismatic. So it just didn't work for me because I just wasn't that person. It would be like Tanya Tetlow coming into Loyola saying, I have got to act like all the Jesuit priests who came before me because that's the only way to be successful. And if she had done that, she would have failed. And instead, she had enough confidence to come in and be truly Tanya.
Yeah, I love that because, so much of the conversation about women in leadership roles over the last couple of decades has been merely about sort of numerical representation, as opposed to, I want women to come in and be women, and not just women to come in and try to be, better men.
Oh my gosh, I'll never forget. I was researching with my colleague, Dr. Kendra Reed, we were writing a paper on high performing teams. And there was a research article that said the number one differentiator between the highest performing teams and the lowest was the presence of women on the team. And we couldn't believe it. We're like, what? And the researchers concluded that it was, if a woman is on the team and she is representing herself as a, as a woman, not trying to be like everybody else, people behaved better, right? And I work for a lot of hospitals. I coach a lot of hospital leaders. And I can't tell you how many physicians have told me they're so tired of women showing up trying to be like male doctors. Because it's come up and bring your feminine gifts. That diversity was what we need. And we're finally comfortable with that. But again, when I entered, this was 1998, and there were very few women in academia. It's different today. I have a young colleague, Brittany Bauer. She's 32 years old. She was a gymnast in college. She is so smart, and she wears these beautiful dresses and these gorgeous heels, and she's got long hair, and she shows up truly feminine and smart, and she's successful. It's a different generation, and they're able to own it a little bit more than I think in my generation was. I mean, my closet was full of black pantsuits. I mean, that's how extreme it was, Howie. I so wanted to be like the men that I tried everything, to look like them too. And that just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm also struck by like all the places in the world where this doesn't yet work, where women are still not given a seat at the table, where women be like, and so I'm thinking like, I have a very complicated relationship with like capitalism and business in general, because I see the harms it can do as well. But there's something about organizations and businesses that they're kind of experimental places for this kind of equality. And I think they're not living up to it. They're not doing enough. When you look at the number of women leading startups and getting funded by Silicon Valley, or the number of women in the C-suites, it's still a horribly small percentage. But at least like there are places you can look for these bright spots to say, here's how the world can go.
Oh my gosh, over 50% of our business students are women. Over 50% of our law school students are women. And so I'm in these incredibly diverse classrooms where it's fantastic. But we do talk about, and that is a but at the very top, we're not represented like that. And I just ran a gender discussion in my leadership class, and I put the men on one side of the room and the women on the other side of the room. And I said, okay, what are your stereotypes? When you think about women and how they communicate, what are the stereotypes? And then, the men said, well, they talk a lot, and they lead with emotion and they get very emotional. And then the women talked about, the men don't listen well, and all they want to do is solve my problems and not really tune in. And so if we were able to have a robust conversation about that, wasn't always the case. And how can we come together? Because if the women are seen as better listeners, then that can really help team environments. And then if men are seen, if they can be good problem solvers, then that can help. It's the way that we frame things and the language we use to describe situations. But if you have, the majority of men at the top in the C-suite who are still thinking, oh, we have, one woman, but boy, she sure is emotional and talks too much. That is really not going to work, right? We need to dispel all of those stereotypes and just have these conversations.
Yeah. So one other thing that comes up for me, and when you were talking about Ben Zander, so in my early 20s, I was in a choir that was a pretty high level organization, and we had a very easygoing conductor. And we'd sing well, but then there was a special, and we were going to sing with the National Symphony Orchestra, and they brought in this like really high powered conductor from Europe who was and he was an asshole. And we sang our hearts out. Like we were terrified of him, and we raised up to a level that we would not have reached otherwise. And I'm wondering how you, like, there must be ways to separate, to disconnect expectations from the old command and control versus the new connection style. But I think there's perceptions like, okay, this person is, a drill sergeant. Well, we're going to do the drills. So how do you think about, as the kind of leader you are and the kind of leadership you document in the Seismic Shift in Leadership, how do those people get the same level of expectations or higher achievement than the command and control tough guys?
I just had this conversation with one of my leaders who's also a CEO of a different company. And he said, Michelle, he said, leadership is a lot like parenting. He said, my kids at the end of the day are a little bit scared of me, and they know I have very high expectations of them, and I'm going to hold them accountable. And they also know that I love them. And I need to do the same as a leader with the people who work for me. They need to know I really, really care about them as full humans, and I'm going to lean in with kindness, and I demand high results. And they know that, and they're going to work hard for that because I care about them. So what I'm really referring to is the old command and control, that type of leader who doesn't care about you, who only cares about results and the bottom line, and doesn't care about you as a person. That's what I'm talking about. You can have both because connection does drive results. If you feel connected at work, you have better psychological well-being, which then leads to higher productivity, which also leads to better teamwork, decision-making, and more innovation. So all the research points to you're going to show up as your better self if you feel more connected at work and you have a leader who sees you and sees all of you. You will work harder for that person. So I am trying to get rid of that culture of fear, because a lot of leaders thought that was how best to motivate, but it ends up you're going to get a lot of people leaving the company.
Well, I think it also relates to the metrics of success. So for a lot of command and control companies, like the obvious thing is, we're here to make money, which I think is less and less interesting to a lot of people as the measure of success. And so if you have a leader who's like, our mission is to change the world in this way, or to serve this population, or to bring this beauty into the world, or whatever it is, that it's easier. Like if all I'm trying to do is make money, like, let's face it, like your dad probably made a lot more money for other people than he ever made for himself.
Oh my gosh, yes. We talk about that a lot. If only there had been a bonus system or some sort of compensation tied to what he did, and there never was. But you're absolutely right. Yeah. And when I think about Juan Martin, the global president of Kind Bars, when I interviewed him for my book, he said he's from Spain and he lives in New York City now because Mars bought Kind. And he said, Michelle, I'm about to go into my annual evaluation with the president of Mars. I said, oh, great. I said, you want to rehearse? So how many how many Kind bars did you sell? Did you meet your goals? Did you exceed your goals? He said, Michelle. He said, that is only one metric. He said, we're trying to make the world a kinder place. So another metric is how many acts of kindness were we in charge of? And we were in charge of 250 million acts of kindness. That's our mission. That's our goal, not just selling Kind bars. So I loved that too. And Juan is a beautiful example of how he's very competitive, and he absolutely has very high expectations for his people. And he also cares about them very much as full humans. And he lifted up his espresso cup on our Zoom call. And he said, I love espresso. Europeans love espresso. My people know, as the global president, when I meet with them, we have coffee together. And for the first 10 minutes of our one-on-one together, it's just personal. That's meaningful connection. And that connection drives results.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you mentioned Morag Bennett's book, was it You, Me, We, where like
you,
the
me,
importance
we.
of what is it again?
Yes, you, me, we.
You, me, we. I've got to get her on the podcast. We're trying to arrange that. That having a friend at work is so important. And it's like, it struck me like, what's the purpose of work anyway? What's the purpose of these businesses? If the employees are fodder for this, like, isn't that backwards? Like, shouldn't business exist? Shouldn't anything humans do exist to better the collective, to better ourselves, to make the world a more beautiful place? And I think we're starting to see with millennials and certainly Gen Z and my kids, like, if it doesn't make you dance, then why do it?
I love that, Howie. What a great way to kind of wrap everything up. If it doesn't make you dance, then why do it? If it doesn't make you, and for the listeners, one of the things that Howie really helped me with, we were in a group together, is he encouraged me. He said, Michelle, if you want to dance, dance, right? And it sounds like such a simple thing, but for years, you know, I was trying to kind of suppress this enthusiasm I had for laughing and dancing. And he finally said, why are you doing that? I said, I don't know. And so we're all on this journey, right? We're all on this journey together to really figure out what brings us joy, what makes us dance and smile. And it is connection. But it's got to be intentional these days. We have to show up the best version of ourselves. How do we do that? To make sure we're connected with ourselves. We know ourselves. Then you show up and you can be a really good friend to others, right? And really reach out when they're going through a bad time. We need that interdependence. That's what it's about right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fundamental human need, just in terms of, you know, the human nervous system cannot self-regulate. We can only regulate with others, which is why people are so crazy about their cats and dogs, that they're also mammals that can help us regulate when we don't have friends at work, when we don't have open communication in our families. We've got Fido and Fluffy that will love us. And so the idea, like, to turn your workplace into a great big Fido and Fluffy, like places where we can be human together. I feel like there's real healing that can go on there.
Real healing. And, you know, I got to give a shout out when my daughter was a sophomore. So right in the middle of the lockdown. So around March of 2020, she convinced me to get a pandemic puppy, and had this brilliant persuasive campaign of all the reasons why. Mom, I'm going to be going to college. You're going to be lonely. You're going to need a dog. It will bond us together. And then, of course, you know, we get this puppy and she's upstairs online doing, you know, in her room all day. And I'm stuck with this pandemic puppy. And I got to tell you, 2.5 years later, Howie, I am so grateful that I have this dog now, because that was a hard time through the pandemic. And, you know, we didn't see many people, and we were alone in our homes trying to make sense out of the world and only being able to take walks around the park. I mean, that was a hard time. And I really am so appreciative that I have little Milli Vanilli, if anybody gets that 80s reference, Milli Vanilli, the lip syncing band.
So she doesn't actually bark, right? She just pretends to bark.
She just is a lip syncer. She just pretends. She's a lip syncer. And it's just, you're absolutely right. We need connection with something, whether it's with humans, or when we're in lockdown, whether it's with our animals. And, but yeah, this is not going away. I truly believe this hybrid environment is here to stay. I don't think we're all ever going to go back to the office full time, unless you're in, like, you know, a physician showing up in a hospital giving that sort of care. But if you're in a corporate position right now, the research is showing that we're going to be in this hybrid work world. So we have to figure out how to intentionally connect with others in this virtual environment, and how to embed time for face to face as well. So I'm telling companies, if you're going to be, you know, if everybody's going to be working from home, then you got to spend some money to bring people together face to face once a quarter, and have these team days and team development days to establish that trust and psychological safety, because as humans, we need it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So tell us one more time the name of the book and where people can find out more about you if they choose to.
Yes, the Seismic Shift in Leadership. It's just been a beautiful journey, being able to be on all these podcasts like yours, Howie, and talk about the seismic shift and why connection is so important. And the book, it was #2 on Amazon. It's a bestseller, and you can go to Amazon or wherever books are sold. And you can go to my website to find out more about me. I'd love to hear from you. And if there's a way to contact me, and that's MichelleKJohnston.com.
Okay, and there's no E at the end of Johnston. So Michelle,
that's
with 2
correct.
L's.
Correct.
KJohnston.com. K for connected.
K for connected. I like that.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Howie, for having me. I knew this conversation would be robust, but I mean, you are so smart and you ask the coolest questions. So thank you for this engaging discussion.
Well, thank you. It's two-thirds of being smart is knowing whose books to read. So I love that you're in my life and that we can share this with the world. And I look forward to next time we connect. Thanks so much. Maybe I'll see you down in NOLA one day.
Sounds great. Look forward to that.
Okay. Bye-bye.